All right, way of the way. Please be seated.
Mr. Jonas, if you're ready to proceed.
Thank you, Honor. If I can return to completing the submissions on the Croatian crime base. Evidence will be led to show the limited role expected and played by the DB. This evidence will contradict the ridiculous theory advanced through Babić and others that allege that Mr. Stanišić not only managed to take over the Serbian MOP, but also subverted the whole of the SAO Krajina leadership and military machine and bent them to his will. It is alleged that there was a so-called parallel structure with Milosevic at the head, followed by Stanišić, with the TO of Krajina, the volunteer units, and Matić's police or the militia of Krajina, along with certain presidents of the municipalities. That case rests upon the fiction that in 1991 onwards, Mr. Stanišić had untrammeled power, that he was Mr. Milosevic's right-hand man. As stated at paragraph 45 of the prosecution's pre-trial brief, Minister Sokolović was just a figurehead, and Mr. Stanišić was the de facto Minister of the Interior. However, as the defence case will show, that alleged state of affairs appears to have escaped everyone's notice at that time. Bogdanović was the Minister of Interior of Serbia until June 1991. He, like his successor, Sokolović, was a high-ranking functionary in the Communist Party and thereafter in Milosevic's SPS party. Stanišić was not even a member of either party. When he became chief of the service, in order to prevent the service from becoming a political tool, he actively discouraged anyone from joining any political party. Mr. Stanišić was subject to a politically motivated investigation in 1991. Bogdanović and Junačković tried to remove him. It was only his professionalism and respect from within the service that may have saved him. Your Honours will recall P630, an intercepted telephone conversation between Karadzic and Kertész on the 24th of June 1991. Kertész claimed to Karadzic that Jovica had been given carte blanche, and the prosecution allege that is carte blanche to supply weapons to Bosnia. The defence case will demonstrate that that is not correct, but in any event, as the defence will advance, there could not conceivably have been a criminal purpose in existence in Bosnia in June of 1991. But the point I make at this stage is this. Kertész was right about one thing. Jovica's hands were tied, and he was driving, that is, Junačković was driving Mr. Stanišić crazy. It's a reference to Mr. Stanišić being subject to an internal investigative commission, politically motivated by members of Milosevic's political party. It doesn't make sense, we submit, to suggest that Stanišić was the most powerful man in the MUP, and yet his hands were tied by Junačković. The Supreme Defence Council minutes from the FRY during 1992 make it crystal clear that Mr. Stanišić firstly did not take part in any of that decision-making. Regular attendees of the Supreme Defence Council were members of the federal administration, various leaders of the former Yugoslavia, as well as senior members of the military. The Supreme Defence Council minutes show the Serbian and Montenegrin contribution to the wars in Croatia and Bosnia. They show that their decisions were primarily dictated from this decision-making body. I shall return to these minutes later on. But the Serbian MUP was not invited. Mr. Sokolović attended once on the 7th of August 1992. From 1992 through to the end of 1995, Mr. Stanišić, this omnipresent and omnipotent chief, is mentioned once in the context of making an ordinary arrest. His service barely warrants a mention. We have placed these minutes on our exhibit list. It's an eloquent demonstration of the inaccuracy of the prosecution case against Mr. Stanišić and the DB, that the prosecution did not do the same. As the defence case will show, all the documentary evidence from Supreme Defence Council minutes to the 188th session of the Presidency, the SFRY, on the 25th of February 1992, to the various personal diaries that have emerged, all fail to place Stanišić at the centre of the action. The prosecution case impliedly accepts this. That is why they allege he was a channel of communication. It means he was not a decision maker. Of course, as the various exhibits we will adduce will show, the political and military leadership required no channel of communication. There are tens and tens of intercepts reflecting direct contacts between the politicians and the military. Given the role and importance that is sought to be attributed to Mr. Stanišić, it is instructive how little he appears. Mr. Milosevic required no channel of communication to speak to Karadzic. As the intercepts will show, at times he was on the phone directly with him almost every day. Slide 21. The Mladic diaries are a little interesting. As prosecution exhibit 2529 shows, on the 2nd of July 1993, Mladic has a meeting with Stanišić, Badger, Karadzic, Krajishnik, Stanišić and others. Stanišić introduces Stanišić and Badger as the men who carry out things. An interesting description that the prosecution rely upon as an indication of Mr. Stanisić's importance. However, the more interesting fact has been obscured. The diaries start on the 29th of June 1991. just before Mladić became a colonel and chief of staff of the 9th Corps of the JNA in Knin, and before he moved to being the commander of the main staff of the VRS on the 12th of May 1992. The Stanišić that appears before this 2nd of July 1993 meeting is Micha Stanišić. Your Honours can see the entries which relate to him, even if that is disputed by the prosecution. The entries indicate a Stanišić who is relatively unimportant. A whole war had raged in Croatia in 1991 and in Bosnia in 1992, and the first accused, Milosevic's right-hand man, doesn't appear in Mladić's diaries. Witnesses DST 34, 62, 31 and 43 are 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th witnesses, all occupied significant roles within the Krajina, either on a permanent or temporary basis. Their political or professional roles meant that they were close to the federal state or the RSK leadership, including Mladić and Babić. They did not see or hear of Stanisić's involvement with weapon supplies, the Krajina government, with Dragan, with Golubić, with the police of the Krajina, or their training. They, unlike certain prosecution witnesses like Mr. Lazarevic, did not request or receive relocation packages to comfortable countries overseas. They have no reason to lie to assist Mr. Stanišić. Witnesses DST 35, 44, 63 and 30 will confirm that the same is true in the SBWS. 35, 44 and 63 were all busy professionals working along the border of Serbia with Croatia. Their jobs meant they were operating along the border between Serbia and the SBWS, or inside SBWS itself. The witnesses will confirm the role of the Vojvodina SUP and the Serbian MUP in trying to protect the border, prevent the illegal transport of weapons from Serbia into Croatia and back into Serbia. The witnesses will confirm their role in setting up police stations within the SBWS. It's our submission that these police forces were largely a force for good, preventing crimes and bringing law and order in a region in desperate need of security. DST 35 will describe how this was undermined by the Minister of the Interior, Bogdanović, who, for personal reasons, made sure that Arkan could travel freely with weapons into the SBWS region. DST 44 will describe the friendship between his superior Badger and Arkan. That friendship prevented other, more responsible authorities from taking restraining action. It is Badger, if he was alive, and Bogdanović who should be sitting where Mr. Stanišić is. It is them who provided Arkan and others with support. DST 44 will confirm the collaboration between the Vojvodina SUP, the Serbian DB, and the Serbian Public Security in Action SHREM, designed to protect non-Serbs along the border. All of these witnesses will confirm that the DB's role was limited to gathering intelligence. The Serbian DB did not even assist in the establishment of the RSK DB in 1992.
Mr. Jorash, your speed of speech is slowly going up.
I beg your pardon, I'm just becoming conscious of each time, but I'll slow it down, Your Honour. The prosecution cannot prove, we submit, and the defence case will show that Stanišić played a role in the formation and sustenance of the RSK. In the absence of convincing evidence, they fall back on the mythology of the Red Berets that allegedly began with Mr. Stanišić taking Captain Dragan to Knin. Defence case will refute that allegation. It is based on rumour, speculation, and Captain Dragan's boastful ways. If we can return for a moment to P1050, the diary of Stanišić, the Secretary to General Simatović, the Minister of Defence, written sometime in 1992. As the evidence will show, there is a theme that's developed through the documents. Once again, Mr. Stanišić does not get star billing. On the contrary, he does not even make an appearance at Simović's office and is not even discussed. Your Honours will be invited to read the various portions. They can be found at 1D2616 to 1D2627. The entries read like a who's who of the moment, from Milosevic, Babic, Hadzic, Arkan, Kertész, General Kadijevic, General Adzic, Admiral Brovit, retired General Pekic, and of course the infamous Dragan. The only man of apparent significance who does not make an appearance is Mr. Stanišić. The prosecution make much of P992, slide 25. I beg your pardon, slide 33. Dragan, of course, claimed in a letter that was sent to the command of the TO on the 8th of November 1991 that he had an obligation towards the state security of the Republic of Serbia, and his activities had to be fully in accordance with that service. Putting aside the vagueness of that claim, as with all Dragan's and prosecutorial claims, we invite Your Honours to put it to the test. As the exhibit shows, P992, Captain Dragan was disgruntled about Simović's request that he become an ordinary captain of the TO. At the time he wrote the letter, he was famous throughout Serbia, far beyond his actual achievements. He wanted to be the commander of a new Serbian army. As the defence evidence will show, he thought that by claiming obligations towards the state security, that Simović I've just been helpfully reminded it's slide 25 we're looking at. Beg your pardon. He wanted to be the commander of a new Serbian army. He thought that by claiming obligations towards the state security, Simatović would allow that to happen. Simatović, having refused, Dragan launched a virulent press campaign against Simatović and the Ministry of Defence, making all sorts of outlandish claims about the DB. Your Honours will see from slide 26 another outlandish claim by Dragan concerning the Serbian Special Police Forces. The defence case will explain the Red Beret story. The evidence will strip away the mythology. We agree that the story starts with Dragan and the selection of certain recruits from those who trained at Golubic. The unit consisted of instructors and some recruits who had already been trained at Golubic. The name of the group was the Kninjas. The unit, under the command of Captain Dragan, in autumn of 1991, engaged in military operations, mostly in the direction of the Plevitsi Lakes. The Kninjas were operating under Martic because the Kninjas were part of the police. Second in command was Dragan. The third in command was Zika Crnogorac. They participated in the operation in Plevitsi. The goal of the operation was to push the Croatian forces out. Mr. Simatović was not in command of the unit. They received orders from Martic. They were not part of the DB. As the Mladic diaries we referred to earlier suggest, they were indistinguishable from the RSK police because they were the RSK police. At some point in time, in autumn of 1991, the Kninjas were ordered to assist the JNA in capturing Ilok. They based themselves in Fruška Gora. That 25 to 30 strong group included Crnogorac and Raja-Bozović. As the defence evidence will show, principally through DST 42, it was around this time that Mr. Stanišić became involved with the group. He negotiated to use some of the Kninjas to assist with Serbian state security duties. Ilok is just a few kilometers distance from Paisos, where an intelligence outpost of the DB service was located. It consisted of an electronic surveillance installation, and men from the Kninjas were used to secure it. The members of this security detail did not take part in any military operations on behalf of the Serbian DB. Your Honours may recall the evidence of prosecution witness JF031, who recalled Mr. Stanišić visiting Fruška Gora in October of 1991, or thereabouts. Mr. Stanišić visited with his young son, who was clutching a magazine with the Kninjas on the front. The Kninjas were famous, and his son wanted to see this now famous group. Had Fruška Gora been a proper military base, would Stanišić have brought his young son? Stanišić had in mind that this group might be useful to the state security of Serbia for a limited purpose. As was confirmed by JF031, Stanišić emphasized that the men to be used for Paisos were not to be used for military operations. Panic was persuaded that the men should not be used for operations in Vukovar. We rely upon that evidence. It is a colourful demonstration of Mr. Stanisić's intent. Whilst the JNA, the TO, the volunteers, including Arkan, were hell-bent on destroying Vukovar, Stanišić refused to be involved or to allow himself to be drawn into that war. A short while later, a group of men, including Božović, entered Paisos and began guarding it on behalf of the Serbian mob. They remained part of the RSK police and were commanded by Matic. They were on loan to the DB of Serbia for that and only that task. The remainder of the Kninjas were assigned by Matic elsewhere and had nothing to do with the Serbian DB. It is perhaps possible that had Mr. Stanisić's role with these men ended there, with the subcontracting of a limited number for this limited purpose, he may not have found himself as an accused in this trial. However, in early 1992, a terrorist group from Croatia infiltrated into Serbia and had to be hunted down and captured in the Serbian town of Apatin. Mr. Stanišić came with Badger to assess how to handle the situation. The PSI, the Public Security Anti-Terrorist Unit, was temporarily out of action. A decision was made to use a small group of the Kninjas, including Raja Božović, to catch these terrorists, who were eventually handed over in a prisoner exchange to the Croatians. Mr. Simatović noted this fact in his cooler speech. He stated that this was one of the most important tasks undertaken by the Serbian Special Unit, capturing the terrorists from Apatin. He got the date wrong and placed that occurrence in 1993, but nonetheless, it's a curious aspect of his speech that despite coordinating 5,000 men in Krajina, setting up 26 training camps, supervising thousands of flights transporting essential military and humanitarian equipment, active participation in 6 operations in Croatia and Bosnia, that Mr. Simatović should describe the capture of 20 or so terrorists as one of the main successes of the special unit of the DB. It was one of the most important because the remainder was just not true. Following that operation, part of that group who captured the terrorists from Apatin misbehaved and had a conflict with the police in Apatin. One of them was assaulted by Božović. Stanišić ordered that the group should no longer be used by the DB, and Božović was sent a clear message he was no longer welcome in Serbia. Around this time, in February 1992, the UN forces had moved into Croatia pursuant to the Vance peace plan. The men who had been members of the Kninjas were no longer together as one group. There were members in Knin, members in Korenica. Zika Crnogorak went to Slavonia and turned up in Brčko. Captain Dragon had some of his other men in SAO Baranja. These were not offshoots of the DB's special unit, but ex-members of the Kninjas operating as professional volunteers. The defence will show that Mr. Stanišić had nothing to do with dispatching these men to Bosnia or anywhere else. The allegation is based on a theory of a case that once again implies a level of authority and planning that simply wasn't there. There is powerful evidence, and we rely upon it and will corroborate it, that Mr. Stanišić had nothing to do with dispatching Božović to Bosnia. As Exhibit 392, Mladić's diary clearly shows. Božović, a professional volunteer, received a request from the commander of the 1st Krajina Corps in Bosnia, General Talić, to report to the Dubois Centre. The chief of the centre was Andrija Biočević. 15 or 20 men were transferred with Božović. In our submission, the Mladić Diary 392 is proof positive that Mr. Stanišić did not arrange for Božović to go to Dubois. He didn't arrange for Božović, he didn't arrange for any of the men to go anywhere. That is the story of the genesis of the Red Berets, which will be outlined in the defence case. It's the story of men who formed a group that became famous. Their fame was enhanced by claims of their connections to the DB. Journalists and the prosecution did the rest. As DST 40 will confirm, there existed a Serbian MOP decision dated the 4th of August 1993 to form an anti-terrorist unit. The evidence will clearly show that this was the formation of a new unit. It required planning and organisation. It wouldn't have been needed if the prosecution theory is correct. DST 40 will testify to the efforts made to create this unit. He will confirm and elaborate that the formation of such a unit is a difficult endeavour. It takes years to set up a professional unit. DST 40 will confirm the DB's committed attempts to employ appropriate people. The concept of reserve forces is important in this case. The MUP Serbia was legally entitled, in fact obligated, to employ reserve forces when they were needed to prevent activities aimed at endangering the security of the country. The defence case will show that Mr. Stanišić had no role in employing or paying reserve forces. He had no role in the employment of persons who the prosecution claimed to be key members of the special unit of the Serbian DB. That certain undesirable men may have found their way onto the list of reserve forces that is, the temporary forces, is unsurprising in the chaos of war. However, it has nothing to do with Mr. Stanišić in the same way that the employment of temporary staff in this court has nothing to do with the President of the ICTY. Slide number 28 shows the type of employment decisions that Mr. Stanišić made. The defence case will show that these themselves were barely decisions. There was a commission at the centre of the 8th administration, the administration which dealt with logistics and supplies. The commission made the selection of employees, and Mr. Stanišić would sign those decisions. In the absence of a good, obvious reason not to, Mr. Stanišić was effectively rubber stamping other decisions. That members of the Kninjas, or those they associated with, or reserve forces, would claim to be members of the DB is again unsurprising. Find me a bar in the world full of men with military experience, and I'll find you a man who claims to have been a member of special forces. Find me a man who fought alongside any of the ex-Kninjas during the Balkans War, and I will find you a member of the Red Berets. It's a convenient prosecutorial theory, but it's a poor way, we submit, to attribute individual culpability for international crimes. Part 3 of the defence case will deal with the alleged contribution of the accused to the Bosnian and Herzegovina crime base. It will set out to demonstrate 3 central propositions. First, that there is absolutely no reliable evidence that supports the existence of a criminal purpose in Bosnia before April of 1992. Second, that had the Serbian political or military authorities from Serbia participated in any criminal purpose after that date, which is doubtful, they had most certainly withdrawn from it by late 93 at the latest. The defence will show that the Serbian military and political authorities withdrew any meaningful cooperation from the Bosnian Serb leadership at around this time. There was no shared concerted action in furtherance of any criminal purpose. The third part of this section of the defence will show that Mr. Stanišić did not at any time share any criminal purpose, nor did he contribute in any way. Dealing with the first point, that there was no criminal purpose in Bosnia and no evidence to suggest otherwise until at least April 1992. The prosecution case establishes that in late August 1991, the SDS leadership within Bosnia began to consider the creation of separate Serb territory with a view to enabling Serbs to remain in Yugoslavia. This plan envisaged the institution of separate structures, including the police and the military and the political arenas. prosecution case also establishes that on the 19th or 20th of December 1991, a document which became known as the Implementing Instructions for Variant A and B was introduced by Stanišić to a meeting of high-level SDS representatives. On the 16th Republic of Srpska Assembly session, Stanišić outlined the Bosnian Serbs' 6 strategic objectives. I hope Your Honours will forgive me from reading a section of the Krasniki judgment upon which we will rely, paragraphs 1995 and 1996. It would be incorrect to place these goals on a pedestal, for in the final analysis they are anodyne statements, serving as official state policy. And even qualifying for publication in the Bosnian Serb Republic's official gazette. If one is inclined to find in them insidious hidden meanings, it's because of the context and the events that followed. An anachronistic reading of the May goals is not only inadvisable, it misses the point. Much more important in relation to actual policy was the feedback loop of coordination and support that existed between Bosnian Serb forces on the ground and the central leadership. Takeovers, killings, detention, abuse, expulsions, and so on had begun in the territories before the pronouncement of the strategic goals on the 12th of May 1992. These incidents were launched in early 1992. The defence will rely upon this to assert that there could not have been any shared criminal purpose until this time. A plurality of persons acting in concert in pursuit of a common purpose. Whilst we do not accept that the Serbian political and military leadership were part of any plurality acting in pursuit of any criminal purpose within Bosnia, the defence will demonstrate that following the Bosnian Serbs' rejection of peace endeavours, any cooperation or collaboration between the two became minimal. It became from Serbia proper, intended only to prevent war and a burgeoning refugee crisis in Serbia. The framework of the defence we shall present will rest on the discussions and decisions that took place in the Supreme Defence Council of the remnants of the SFRY. The disenchantment with the extremists from the Bosnian Serb leadership began in '92, and by late 1994, cooperation that might imply a shared criminal goal and criminal intent had long since ceased. Slide 30 is an excerpt from the Supreme Defence Council minutes in June of 1993. It is clear from reading these minutes that Serbian authorities and the leadership who were part of the Supreme Defence Council had had enough. There was still some assistance, as the Supreme Defence Council minutes reflect. However, this did not last long. As slide 31 demonstrates, and of course we invite your honours to read the whole of the minutes, the Fry decided to sever relationships with the leadership of the RS. It reiterated that it should wield influence on the Republic of Srpska because peace was in its common and most important national and state interests. It recognized that if Banja Luka was bombed, there would be 100,000 refugees flooding into Serbia. Slide 32 and 33 are more of the same. This nation, Serbia, shall not be slaughtered because of 3 hotheads from Pale. By the 27th of September 1994, the time of the 25th session, the Supreme Defence Council most certainly had had enough. However, the decisions to withdraw aid and assistance were not straightforward. The security of the Bosnian Serbs was also a matter of security within Serbia. This is discussed at length in the Supreme Defence Council minutes. As slide 34 reflects, on the 2nd of November 1994, the Supreme Defence Council recognised the reality. They recognised that, whilst not wanting to assist with the Bosnian Serbs' territorial objectives, there was a need to prevent the war flooding into Serbia. There was a need to return refugees to the Bihać region. These were the discussions which were the basis for PAUK. These were the discussions which were the basis for Mr. Stanisić's involvement in PAUK. Slide 35, of huge relevance, we submit for the prosecution case in 1995. The Supreme Defence Council recognised a real threat if the Bosnian Serbs were defeated. The security of Serbia was threatened. Refugees and the crisis that would be caused were at the forefront of the participants' minds. The aforementioned Supreme Defence Council minutes and decisions will be the framework of the defence case relating to the Bosnian crime base. The defence evidence will show that there can be no doubt that any shared criminal purpose had ended long before 1995. The assistance offered in late 1994 onwards by Mr. Stanišić to Operation PAUK was not motivated by any criminal intent, but a genuine desire to bring the leadership of the RSK to the peace table and to solve a genuine refugee crisis in Bihać and to prevent a larger one in Serbia. The operations in Trnovo and the operations in Banja Luka must be seen in this light. That is why the prosecution have struggled to explain the relevance of PAUK to their joint criminal enterprise. The prosecution's joint criminal enterprise fails to distinguish between lawful action in pursuant of lawful objectives and war in pursuit of crime. Mr. Stanišić, we submit, did not contribute to the Bosnian crime base. Defence will show that the accused did not contribute in any way to the criminal purpose, if one existed, in Bosnia. As the defence will show, there is simply no reliable evidence. Mr. Mladić's crude attempt to implicate Mr. Stanišić through a set of doctored diaries will be exposed. The Bosnian Serb MOP arose from an enactment on the 28th of February 1992, the Bosnian Serb Law on Internal Affairs. The Bosnian Serb MOP was to handle security affairs on behalf of the government. We accept that in the early days the Bosnian Serb MOP coordinated with and was helped by the Republic of Serbia. Reports prepared by the Federal State Security Services in March 1992 confirm formal cooperation between the Federal SUP in Belgrade and the Bosnian SUP police. The defence case will prove that this coordination plan did not involve the Serbian DB. It is powerful proof of Mr. Stanisić's state of mind that his service did not assist the Bosnian MOP or DB. This is borne out by the Mladić diaries, and even with the attempt to implicate Mr. Stanišić, they bear witness to Mr. Stanisić's failure to assist. As I've already outlined earlier, it is true that Stanišić introduced a meeting with Mladić on the 13th of December 1993 and stated, "It is because of your initiative we are meeting to improve your operational and tactical position and see about help from Serbia." But it is also true that Stanišić did not say another word at that meeting, according to Mladić. He was in that instance going through a formality, merely introducing the meeting. The defence will show that he nor his service assisted the Bosnian Serbs. The defence case will show that the assistance to the Bosnian Serbs came from other quarters. Slides 36 to 48 show a reflection and a representative selection of where that assistance came from. These exhibits show where that assistance came from. Slide 48. Prosecution 65-2351. A request sent to Stanišić from the Republic of Srpska MOP, 12th of May 1995. Could your technical service please repair and service a mobile 400-watt shortwave communication center, generator unit and a vehicle could you please also reconsider our early request for the necessary technical equipment? That, in June 1995, when Mr. Stanišić was supposed to be at the height of his powers, is how the Republic of Srpska MUP regards Mr. Stanišić. Your Honours will note the request to reconsider our earlier request. Mr. Stanišić did not form any cooperative relationship with the Bosnian DB. That is why he's largely absent from Mladić diaries. There was an open conflict between his service and the Bosnian service. Mr. Stanišić did not like General Mladić. As Mr. Stanišić had declined to become involved with Vukovar in late 1991, he wanted no part in attacks on safe areas or the disgraceful bombing of civilian areas such as those in Sarajevo and elsewhere. This animosity turned to open conflict in June of 1995 when Mr. Stanišić negotiated the release of the UNPROFOR hostages. It was plain to Mr. Stanišić that he was not negotiating with a rational man. Unfortunately, but predictably, that lack of reason has not been removed over the last 15 years. Despite the fact that Mladić had ample opportunity and every reason to do so over the last 15 years to doctor his account, the prosecution in this case proffered them without reservation as truth. It will be interesting to see if that's the position adopted during the prosecution of Mladić. It is plain on their face, we submit, and the defence case will show through detailed evidence that they are self-serving when implicating others. The massacres in Srebrenica appear not to have occurred in the world outlined by Mr. Mladić. The defence case will show that the entries implicating Stanišić barely make sense and will not be corroborated. If I can return to the 2nd of July 1993 meeting, where Stanišić is alleged to have said, the majority of what we need should be issued via the MUP of Serbia. The centre should be Pale, Herzegovina, and Talić. There is no evidence that the Serbian MUP set up centres in these locations. There's no evidence that Talić is even a location, but might be a reference to General Talić. It is, however, quite telling, and the defence case will elaborate on this point, that at the end of the meeting, Mladić takes only Stanišić's number, telephone number. Of course, when one reads the Supreme Defence Council minutes and looks at the remainder of the exhibits, it is plain that neither Stanišić nor Badger financed or supplied the VRS. The Serbian DB did not even support the RS DB. This is not to argue, and we will not argue it during our defence, that the Serbian MUP, that is the public security, did not offer assistance to the Bosnian Serbs. Nor will the defence suggest that there were not individuals with the DB who offered ad hoc assistance to the Bosnian Serb forces. It is quite possible, for example, as alleged by prosecution witness JF026, that the RS MUP received aid in the form of uniforms and communication equipment from police stations in Mali Zvornik and Loznica. It was, however, a constant frustration of the Bosnian Serbs that the Serbian MUP did not provide proper assistance. Whether that submission is correct or not, the contributions offered by the Serbian MUP cannot be attributed to Mr. Stanišić. Had Mr. Stanišić been aware of any involvement of the DB resources or personnel in the training of any forces, including those that went to Bosanski Samac, he would have stopped it. We shall apply to admit the testimony of the commander of the 17th Tactical Group, Nikolic, and 2 men trained at that alleged Serbian DB camp, DST 68 and 57. The training was organised by the JNA Command and the Federal Secretariat for National Defence. The training lasted for only a few days and involved, it follows, only minimal resources. In other words, that and other training camps could exist without institutional support by the DB. It could exist and did exist without Mr. Stanisić's knowledge. It has nothing to do with him. These men, who I've referred to, the witnesses we will apply to admit, gave evidence in the Simic trial that they were members of the RS Police or the RSK Police. None of them claimed any connection to Stanišić or to the mythological Red Berets. JF-47, who was recalled to this court to deal with obvious inconsistencies, perjured himself for personal gain. As the defence evidence will show, it was Mr. Stanisić's service that arrested Lugar and Debeli in Serbia when they returned from their exploits in Bosanski Samac. If Mr. Stanišić had been involved in investing so much in training these elite forces, why would he have supported their arrests upon their return to Serbia in 1992? Your Honours, I have about 10 minutes. Would Your Honours allow an extra 10 minutes, please?
Yes, you're well over the 2 hours now. At the same time, I was informed, Mr. Groom, that there was a matter in relation to protective measures which you would like to raise. Is that correctly understood?
Yes, Your Honor, I estimate it would take about 5 minutes.
It might even take a bit more, to the extent that I'm informed about the nature of the matter you wanted to raise. Ms. Jordas, I was asking this because we usually have a break after 75 minutes. We're now close to 70 minutes. I would suggest that we take a break first, that you then have your additional 10 minutes, that we're then hear Mr. Groom
Thank you.
on the matter he would like to raise, and that we finish well in time.
Thank you, Your Honour.
While you say you have 10 minutes left, then apparently the slides are not equally distributed over the time. You are claiming that even if you would take 12 or 30 minutes, that under the present circumstances would not cause a great problem.
Thank you.
We'll take a break. We'll resume at 12:30. Mr. Jordas, you're expected not to finish any later than 10 minutes to 1, and then we'll hear the further submissions by Mr. Groom.
Alright, voyez-vous.